Hi, this is Eric Durek, and welcome to this edition of Med Health Fit, the TV show that integrates wellness and healthcare. And this is the start of season 9 for Med Health Fit. Fantastic. We've been on the air a long time. And to celebrate our first episode of the year, I have my good friend and colleague and 3-time visitor to Med Health Fit, Travis Middleton, back on the show. Welcome.
Thank you. Nice
All
to be
right,
here.
so we have a very interesting show tonight. It's a 2-part series to open up the season, and we're really going to go head deep into this vaccine debate because we're entering sort of a dangerous time in the arena of vaccines, and that dangerous time is really the mandates are now going state by state by state. It's almost like the marching orders for the Third Reich here.
Right.
Now, you and I were up in Morro Bay, California, a couple weeks ago, and we saw the movie Vaxxed 2. And the premise of that movie was that there are many children who, across the nation, went to go see the initial Vaxxed movie, spent time with Polly Tommy and the crew, signed their names on the bus, either a child who was injured or who had passed away. And in our conversation with Polly, there are almost 10,000 names on that bus now. So
Right.
their trip across the United States a couple years ago was, in the words of Polly, was mind-blowing, the number of vaccine injuries that they see, and they have seen just a small portion of them, but they had people lined up to go see the movie and lined up to meet her, and she had thousands and thousands of interviews that she did with people. I thought it was fantastic.
Yeah, it was called The People's Truth. So, I mean, they got a chance to interview people, average everyday families who've been injured by vaccines, and to what extent, and hear some of their stories and document some of the things that were going on with their families.
Yeah,
It's very impactful.
And you know, there were a couple stories in that movie that were just heartbreaking. That you know, the young man who wound up committing suicide
Right.
because he didn't want the family to go through a lifetime of burden. But I also want to talk about the economic aspects of it, either in this episode or the next episode. So the New Jersey State Legislature just last week rejected a vaccine mandate, and the internet went crazy from all of the Vax Freedom people because they really felt that it was a solid win, even though the legislature who authored the bill wants to make some changes and then put it right back in. This is sort of what we're dealing with. But in my first question, about a week ago, I saw an interview with a young lady from a company called Lawful America, and her name is Michelle Walker, and she was talking about unlawful or illegal laws in what you described through this American jurisprudence, and she basically said that under, I think it's a civil code or a criminal code 16177, that certain laws that are knowingly put into the system by the legislatures, first off, are non-laws, and secondly, the people who put those laws knowingly and willfully illegal laws are themselves guilty of treason. So you spoke about this aspect, and I want you to sort of really dive into this in this section right here.
Right. There are 2 volumes of legal writings called Corpus Juris Secundum and American the Law Review. The one that she was referring to, Corpus,
Right.
I think it was called American Law Review, where she spoke about a certain section that talked about those foundational precedents, where the foundation of our country's constitutional bylaws and requirements, and the limitation of power from the federal government and state legislatures as well. Now, yes, when a legislature or a politician tries to create a law that they know is wholly going to contradict the Constitution, state or federal, that is an act of treason. And the reason why that is they are subverting their sworn oath to support and defend and protect that document and its
Right.
way of life.
Right.
A lot of folks don't want to talk about that, but that's really what it is. And she's correct. It's treason. Now, the question is, what do you do about it?
Exactly.
And what they have done with Lawful America is put the federal government on notice about their lawful conduct and that they're going to be reclaiming their rights by declaration. Now, I like to add, this group is not the first group that's put the federal government on notice.
You have. You've
No,
talked
not
about
like
it.
this.
You haven't put them on notice, but you've talked about these things in a different
Yes.
vernacular.
Right.
And I think in one of our last shows, you actually talked about the fact that, hey, this is an illegal law.
Right. Now, when they put them on notice, let them know they're going to be going after them and taking their property in this notice, as I read it and saw it in the presentation. Now, that's going to bring about a number of different effects from the federal government. The question is now then, who's going to be utilized to secure this property? What mechanism are they going to use to commandeer their property? What agent or agency will be used to actually go apprehend it in a certain process? Which sheriff are they going to use or marshal they're going to use in case they resist? And you have to always plan on the target resisting somehow.
Well, let me stop and go back a half a step. You're saying that because they are guilty of treason, the people have the right now to what? Seize their property? The
That's
legislatures?
what she said. That's what she said.
So their home, their automobile,
Yes.
or something.
Right. Now there is a Uniform Commercial Code, a common law lien process that one could invoke for that process, but one needs to do it correctly. And I've seen cases where people have done it wrong against public officials, they've gone to prison over it. So you need to be careful of the lever you pull. I'll give you an example of one of the things that she's talking about in terms of why they're doing what they're doing. And for the viewing audience, they need to understand that when you claim that you are a U.S. citizen, you need to be careful with that because there are, according to the Supreme Court, there are 3 distinct definitions for the United States. And here they are. According to Hoover versus Allison Company and Evatt, 324 U.S. 652, 1945 case,
Okay.
ruled that there are 3 distinct and separate definitions for the term United States, quote unquote. Okay? 1, the term United States may be used in any one of several senses. It may be merely the name of a sovereign occupying the position analogous to that of other sovereigns in the family of nations. Okay?
Okay.
The other definition is it may designate the territory over which the sovereignty of the United States extends.
So
That's
like
Article
Guam
1.
is a U.S. territory.
Yes.
So they're
Washington, D.C. is where it extends, and those other enclaves controlled by Congress. That's what
Okay.
it's referring to there.
Okay.
And then it may be the collective name of the states which are united by and under the Constitution.
Okay.
So when one makes the claim that they are U.S. United States citizens, they need to be careful which one they're referring to.
We would be the third one, correct?
Yes,
Okay.
Okay.
Because someone from Guam does
Is-
not have certain rights.
correct. And they are part of the corporation United States. Now, to go on further, under Title 28 U.S. Code Section 3002, definitions and terms. As used in this chapter, the term United States means a federal corporation, just like Dow Chemicals
Right.
or Federal Express. So if it's a corporation, what authority does it have to regulate an individual,
Right.
unless it's by contract?
Right.
Now, I know from my experience in studying liberty and our Constitution for the last 25 plus years, there are certain adhesion contracts that they bait you into so that you can relinquish your rights by not knowing.
Right.
And here's what the Supreme Court has said about that. The Supreme Court ruled in Brady versus U.S., a 1970 case, that waivers of constitutional rights not only must be voluntary, they must be knowingly intelligent acts done with sufficient awareness of the relevant circumstances and consequences. So if no one ever tells you you're waiving a right, that waiver is void.
Okay, so let's bring this to the vaccine issue where a doctor will say, you need to sign this document that just basically says you're not getting your kid vaccinated. Well, that's actually a waiver of certain types of rights from what I've been told. I have not read one of the documents.
Yeah.
But also the school systems. Well, if your kids are not vaccinated, you have to sign these waivers. And everything that I read on the internet says do not sign anything.
And that's one wrinkle. Here's the first wrinkle that parents need to understand. When you enroll your children in the public schools, there's an application intake form. And on that form, there are potholes and entrapment language to entrap your child into the status of a quote-unquote corporate entity person. And you are, by this little contract, saying or granting the school what's called parent patry authority over your children, unbeknownst to the parents. And they need to be aware of that. So now when they come into schools, but the school system says, well, if you're in my school, you have to follow my bylaws. And we're going to subject you to vaccines, whether you like it or not, because the school system is a subsidiary and affiliate of the state.
Of the state, right. The state government agency.
Right.
Right.
So what they're trying to do is, by hook or crook, commandeer your rights unbeknownst to you by some kind of a contractual obligation. So you need to see it that way.
Right.
So parents need to start doing what's called filing a durable and medical power of attorney on behalf of their child once they're in school.
Actually, as they're entering school, right?
Yes.
I mean, first day of school,
right.
Probably would be.
As they're entering, they need to modify the forms of application and draw lines through certain terms, like the word child, and put offspring. A child is a small person. A person's a corporation. It's an artificial entity. It's a creature of statute. You don't want to be a person. You want to be a people.
Right.
And your children are little people. They're not persons. And they're not children. They're offspring. That's the right term.
Right.
But if you didn't know this stuff, you think, oh, my English language says to me, oh, an individual is a person. No, everything you do in terms of dealing with the government, there's a legal consequence, which have legal words and phraseology. And there's legalese. And we need to be aware of what these words and phrases mean, because it can put you into liability or free you from some entrapment.
Right. Or, well, but and again, and I'm going to always bring this back to the case of the vaccines, is that almost everything that's being done right now is done to entrap parents.
Correct.
To A, dilute their rights, and to B, sort of confuse them as to, well, I have this sort of right, but maybe not in this particular situation where, they're trying to say, and one of the things that I remember hearing on the internet for many years is that, well, you have to have shots to attend school. And this was 10, 20 years ago. It was like, no, you didn't have to have. It wasn't true. It was untrue.
Right.
And the only states that I'm aware of is in New York, California, and maybe one or two other states where they now have laws similar to SB 277. And again, now we're going to try to dissect just how unlawful this is. Now, you and I talked about suing the legislatures, and before we went on air, we talked about qualified versus absolute immunity. So,
elaborate on that.
Elaborate on that. Talk a little bit more about that concept.
Our government and the courts have kind of set up a false system of protecting judges and legislators and political individuals by this thing called qualified immunity and absolute immunity. And where they claim they get it from is the 11th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Now, when you go read the 11th Amendment, nowhere in the language of that amendment did it talk about qualified or absolute immunity for any judicial officer or any legislator. It's not there. The word immunity is nowhere in that language.
Really?
No, it's not. So when you read that, you think, well, where are they getting this from? Well, judges do what's called judicial legislation from the bench when they make case law out of something they said on a bench on the record. Well, the judge has immunity, or the legislator has immunity. He has 11th Amendment immunity, and poor regular people who won't go first look at the 11th Amendment to see if the judge's words are true, just take it as true and they go away with it. Right. Attorneys are the same way. They're trained to believe what these judges say in every aspect, and they kind of fall in place with everything they say. Sometimes they're saying the wrong thing to do what's called judicial legislation to create a precedent for the next judge to latch onto. Well, see, they ruled over here this way.
Right, and it's the precedent that usually gets people into trouble, because it may not be true, but if it's said on different case versus different case versus different case, down and down and down the line, then people are going to just take it as a well, this is just the way it is, because here it was in this case, and then and then a few years before that. So it's almost like this concept that we keep hearing about within the vaccine freedom community, is that if you hear a lie long enough, it becomes truth.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I try to impart to my children and people who will sort of listen to me is I say to them is that a lot of things that you think you know in life just aren't true.
Correct.
And if you go about that aspect, that you may have learned some things, but you better keep digging in on some stuff, because otherwise, I believe that a lot of parents have gotten themselves into this issue because they trusted the school systems, who I really don't believe have the best interest of children at heart.
No, they don't.
They're a bureaucracy. They trusted their doctors. Mm-hmm. Now, 25 years ago, you said, I don't want to get my kids vaccinated. They would say,
They respected
okay, that's fine. But they don't do that anymore. So now we have a whole generation.
Well, I have a way around that too.
Okay, go ahead.
But I want to first address the parents' issue. Parents do not know their rights. It has never been incumbent upon them in the last 20 years to learn these rights.
Right.
Because it wasn't at their doorstep. 25 plus years ago, when I was involved in learning the Constitution and people in person and immunity and all this sort of thing, people thought I was a nutcase. Why are you learning all this stuff? I said, because one day I may need the information.
Right.
One day. Our rights are being encroached upon on a yearly basis.
Weekly basis.
The federal government is writing in excess of 66,000 pages of new regulations every single year after year, none of which you're immune from unless you know what I know.
Right.
So that's why you need to learn some of that stuff. Because when your time comes, when your child's in the loop, you need to know these things about, well, what happens when I put my kid in school? Well,
right.
There's a way to overcome some of this stuff. What happens when I go to the doctor? He wants to force a vaccine on me.
What happens when we have a child in a hospital?
Yes.
And they say, hey, you've got to get all these shots now.
And there's a way around that too.
Right.
And I bought some paperwork for that to show you as well.
So let's go to the second question, still on parents' rights. 4 or 5 years ago, I read an article in Thrive magazine, which I thought was absolutely fantastic, talking about parents' rights. And they talk about case law like Prince versus the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, Wisconsin versus Yoder, Meyer versus Nebraska, City of Akron versus the Akron Center for Reproductive Rights, Thornburg versus the American College of OBGYN, Stanley versus Illinois. And all of these legal issues dealt with parents' rights, but they dealt with them from the standpoint that parents, within reason, have the right to make family and child decisions first, before doctors, unless it's an emergency, and that's where you say within reason. I mean, obviously, if your child's choking on something and whatever. But
I also mean in terms of if there's clear, convincing evidence that the parent is unfit and putting the child in harm's way, the state can come in and save the child.
Right.
That's a state obligation as well.
Mm-hmm.
But the criteria is if there's clear, convincing evidence of this neglect, then they can do that.
Right. Well, you and I had talked about, I think, on our second interview about Child Protective Services, and there were some very interesting YouTube videos about CPS going to a person's house. We just want to see your child, whatever. And I don't know if the vaccine issue came up, but it was a parent who did not vaccinate his child, and there were 2 police officers standing in the back.
Yeah.
And he essentially said, "You're not coming in." Well, we need, and then he just kept saying, well, you go talk to those officers. They're right behind you. How come they're not breaking the door down? Because they know that legally they don't have a leg to stand on.
Correct.
And I really think that I have a friend in Arizona whose grandson's parents, his mom and dad, were both drug users. So when the child was born prematurely, CPS stepped in, did a bunch of testing, all this kind of stuff. But they said, we're going to take the child because you guys are not fit, because they were drug addicts. But the grandmother stepped up and said, no, I'm taking care of the child. Now, she still had to sort of agree to having these weekly and then monthly visits for the first year or whatever, and the child is now thriving under her.
Well, she didn't have to agree with that.
Well, she thought she did, so this isn't,
Well, here's the
so-
first thing about that. First thing is, let's say, based on what you just said, that these two parents were drug addicts. Well, they're entitled to due process, which means you have to bring them into some kind of a tribunal proceeding and have some kind of either jury trial or judicial officer make the determination based on the evidence that, oh, by the way, you guys have been deemed by the court as being drug addicts and unfit to be a parent for this child. And as such, my order is I'm going to transfer this child's rights over to the grandmother. If they don't have that process, they don't get due process. You can't just say, well, I'm going to just name you unfit out on the street someplace and take your child without the court process.
Right. Well, in this instance, I think that they had been in one of the jail or whatever. They had tested positive for drugs, so they knew that. And I think that in this case they were at some way, shape, or form wanting to do what was in the best for the child.
Okay.
But in their zealousness to sort of go to about the letter of the law, they forgot about the grandparents who were more than capable.
Right, and they have a duty to ask, is there any other
Right.
relative that you're close to that can step in your shoes? But sometimes they overlook that because they're bureaucrats, like you said.
Right. Well, all right. So is CPS a health enforcement agency?
It's a child enforcement agency, not a health enforcement agency.
Okay. So they can, by enforcement, can they actually go to someone's home and enter a person's home if they
Yes, by
probable
court,
cause? Or
by
something?
court order and probable cause.
Okay. All right. So that's good. All right. So I'm not a fan of Child Protective Services because I've heard many stories online. I'm not going to repeat them on the show, but it's unnerving to hear about what Child Protective Services are doing, basically badgering parents, et cetera, and much worse. But I think that this is one of those types of agencies that really needs to be sort of reined in here.
Well, they can be.
In terms,
But again, and I've been harping on this for the last 5 years, that parents are going to have to start learning their rights and rules of engagement when it comes to public officials. The time of being scared and dumbed down and downtrodden is over.
Yeah.
You either become a warrior or you become a victim. That's the reality. So, when you have a CPS agent at your door and they don't have a warrant signed by a judge to enter your premises to speak to you or your child, you make them go away and you tell them, since you have no warrant, you can't speak to me, you can't speak to my child, you can't see my children, and now you're trespassing,
Right.
which is a crime, and I'm now going to have you put on a citizen's arrest, if it's in California, under Penal Code 18115, for what's called a citizen's arrest. And if they have sheriffs or police officers in the tow or standing beside them, the officers are required, if you make this call, to place that officer on the arrest and put them in cuffs and take them downtown. Now, yes, you, being the person who's effectuating the arrest, not the officer, must go downtown and fill out the paperwork, a criminal complaint on this person who just created a crime on your property. It's called
Right.
trespass
Right.
without a court order. Now, if parents will start doing that more often, guess what? CPS will knock it off. You know why? They'll get tired of billing out their agents
Right.
for being sued in district court for civil rights violations. But parents are scared and don't know their rights, so they don't have the willingness and the confidence to do what I just said do.
Right.
You got to learn that stuff. Otherwise, you will become a victim.
Yeah. So on our website, vaxfreedom.org, which I'm going to put a plug in for right now, one of the things that I think that you want to do is actually start putting some of these documents on the site and giving a little more information, which I went through and read it last night, and I do see some information we have for parental rights, but we're going to be adding to that. So the last question here, with the few minutes that we have left, doctors are now pediatricians are firing their patients if they do not consent to vaccinate. Is that legal or illegal? Or is that just a contract dispute?
It's a contract dispute.
Okay, so
Here's the thing. Parents are not required to stay with a physician they don't trust, that they're going to treat their child or themselves medically sound.
right.
So if the doctor wants to fire you, let them. Find a new doctor. Go visit an integrative medicine doctor, a homeopath, or whatever.
Well, I had Dr. Crystal Galvan and Dr. Jesus Witten on the show. We did a tag team last season, and we really spoke about the fact that, in my opinion, I think that chiropractors should be the new pediatricians. I really think
Not
that
a bad idea.
even from birth, that the adjustments that they make on infants, toddlers, and then young children, and the information that they give out about nutrition, exercise, spinal, adjustments, posture, etc., probably will do more to help the growth and maturation of that child than these, quote, these well baby visits. I don't
You're
really
right.
see any value in those at all. And I really think, and with the last couple minutes we have left, and you actually answered all of those things that I had on here, is that I really think that there is a little bit of an awakening starting to happen with,
Yes,
with parents
I see that.
and youngsters. Now, there was a friend of mine at work today came to me and he said there was a new report that came out about the flu shot, and that most of the millennials and young kids, they don't have anything to do with it.
Good.
It's like 50-60%, and why would I want to get a flu shot? So I'm starting to see this, and again, with this legislation that was defeated in New Jersey last week, we're starting to see, and one of the guards at the New Jersey courthouse or wherever they had
He was a
this.
police officer.
The police officer, he was questioned by some of the media people from the Del Bigtree's folks, and he said, I've never seen in 20 years this many people
Right.
coming to, and we'd had the same thing in Sacramento, thousands of people
Right.
who came. So I really think that there is a shift that's happening. I just hope that the shift starts to expand wide enough here in the next year, because as you know, there's 35, 36 states now who are trying to get these vaccine mandates on the agenda, and they're going to continue. And you know what happens when you get a animal cornered, and they're going to come out. And the vaccine companies right now are riding high, but I really think that in the very near future, there are going to be some issues. It's going to take one lawsuit. Hopefully, it's going to be you, but it's going to take one lawsuit where an elected official is going to go down. So I'm going to save the next couple of questions for our next episode.
Okay.
Anything that you want to add here in the last minute in terms of the parents' rights come first, correct?
Yes, but here's the thing. Parents need to know how to invoke their rights. It won't be given to you.
Right.
So if you don't know your rights, you can't claim them.
Right.
So by default, you will waive them out of fear or out of ignorance,
Right.
or both.
And like I say, and I think that a lot of parents, the problem with having kids is that you have them when you're in your 20s, not in your 40s. So, but anyway, this is I think that it is one of the more seminal issues in medicine. It is one of the most seminal issues in law. And I just think in terms of society, and when we get into the next segment, I want to kind of talk about what's going to be going on with society in terms of maybe the economic cost of this. But Travis Middleton, one of the great minds of the legal fight here with the vaccine issue. Thanks for being on this episode. We'll see you on the next one. And this is Eric Durack for MedHealth Fit. Welcome to Season 9. We'll see you next time.